My dear friends, the reason why I am presenting this video is not only because this is a case of a toric IOL associated with a small pupil, but also because I encountered a small PC rent under very peculiar circumstances. So let's look at how the case went. As you can well see, this pupil is a 4 mm non-dilating pupil. I am making an additional side port entry in order to be able to implant the pupil dilating device. So let's start with the pupil dilating device, which is injected into the anterior chamber. Like I previously said, that the injection of the device gives you a certain degree of control, and it enables you, if you are cautious enough about it or if you are careful enough about it, to be able to engage at least 3 scrolls at one go. It's not difficult. Now this was a reused Gupta ring. I work in a center that believes in cost cutting. It was ETO sterilized and provided to me. So while I tucked the 4th loop underneath the pupillary edge, because a reused device has scrolls that are wide open, one of the scrolls slip out of the pupillary edge, and it requires an additional maneuver to put it into place. The capsular excision is then performed, aiming for a 5 to 5.5 mm round central capsular excision, using the square edge of the pupil as a template and as a guide to create it. This patient had quite a soft cataract, just about grade 1 nuclear sclerosis. However, I did not believe at this point that this soft cataract is going to be a challenge. I perform an adequate cortical cleavage hydrodissection. I go with a phaco power of 30% in the micropulse mode, working with a vacuum setting of 250. I am using a microflow tip. So I am using the dual linear foot pedal. I bury the phaco tip under low vacuum of about 50 and then increase the vacuum and then try to create the crack. Now this is possible with a dual linear foot pedal system. You can vary the vacuum levels for a given power level, whereas in other systems you need to enter foot pedal 3 only after working through the full preset vacuum. So one of the fragments is removed and the procedure is going in a predictable fashion. However, at this point I encounter a little difficulty. There is cheese wiring and there is a reluctance of the piece to follow the tip into the central safe zone for removal. So I attack another part of the nuclear fragment. I am able to get a small sized pie-shaped fragment and I am able to remove the fragment by moving it into the center of the anterior chamber. So at this point in time, I exchanged the sharp chopper with a Sinskey hook, and because the piece is not following the phaco tip to the central area, I lift the apical portion of the piece from near the center and I feed it into the phaco tip, and once I get an adequate hold, I am able to emulsify this as well. So many times while performing fragment removal, we need to go out of conventional areas of management in order to successfully remove all these fragments. as every surgeon knows. So everything is going fine, and all I have to do is now an adequate cortical washout and then implant a toric lens, and then I'm out. And cortical washout is also happening quite predictably up to this point. When I suddenly take a hold of the posterior capsule, and even though I tap the reflux button, nothing seems to be happening. And now I'm quite desperate. So in my desperation, I try to disengage the capsule with the Sinskey hook. Well, that of course is the wrong decision, and I get around 2 to 3 millimeter opening in the posterior capsule. However, there's no vitreous disturbance. So without undue panic, I go ahead, because I know there's no vitreous in the anterior chamber, I go ahead and remove the remaining portion of the cortex. I do a good cortical cleanup before I come out of the eye. And whenever you have a disruption of the posterior capsule, it's important to do a viscofluid exchange before leaving the eye, and that is the reason why I am injecting methyl cellulose. So while injecting, a little fragment got dislodged from the side port, which is aspirated. So while doing viscofluid exchange, you have to turn off the irrigation and then fill the anterior chamber with the methyl cellulose before pulling out the phaco probe. So now I halt, I take stock of the situation. I see that there is a 2 to 3 millimeter round, slightly eccentric opening in the posterior capsule. I can't see any tags. The opening seems to be smooth and round, and I do not know whether I have to go ahead and try to perform a posterior capsulorhexis, because the opening itself seems pretty round and well contained. So I take a decision at this point to implant the Toric IOL. There's no vitreous disturbance, it's a well contained opening. I enhance the toric marks, which are made with the hockey stick blade, with the marker pen ink, and then I wash it off so that it stains the groove. And now I'm going to implant the Alcon toric intraocular lens. The plan is to implant it into the capsular bag. I look at it under high magnification, and I find that there is a nice round opening, because the opening was created while the posterior capsule was aspirated into the aspiration port of the IA probe. So now injection is going to be a little tricky, and what I do to circumvent this problem is that the leading haptic is put within the capsular bag. I do not tuck in the trailing haptic within the capsular bag. Instead, what I do is I try to rotate the lens to the axis of alignment before tucking the trailing haptic within the capsular bag. So deepen the anterior chamber a bit with viscoelastic. Well, you have to handle this with kids' gloves. You have to be extremely gentle to prevent the posterior capsular opening from extending and ripping apart. And using a Sinskey hook, I dial it slowly within the capsular bag. Trailing haptic is within the capsular bag now. However, the lens is still a little decentered, and I'm wondering why. You see that the opening in the posterior capsule has not extended after implantation of the intraocular lens within the bag. And the reason for the decentration is that the leading haptic is stuck on the optic. It sometimes happens with hydrophobic acrylic. It's unfortunate that it had to happen in this particular case. And the leading haptic would not let go. It was creating a decentration. I can't just leave it like this because this is a Toric IOL implantation. I have to disengage it. And one of the best ways to do it is to go in and with the irrigation aspiration probe, and many times just with the flow of the fluid, this leading haptic will disengage itself. As you can see, it disengages, and once that happens, the lens beautifully centers within the capsular bag. Unfortunately, at this point, I believe that the opening the posterior capsule is also extended peripherally. However, the lens is stable within the capsular bag and nothing else needs to be done. I don't go behind the IOL to remove the viscoelastic for obvious reasons. So I just press upon the IOL, look, and I carefully look for the centering, and I achieve proper alignment of the radial marks of the cornea and the toric marks on the IOL, and also I am able to align the two Hirschberg reflexes in one plane, and I am quite happy with the alignment. I then go ahead and disengage the Gupta ring scrolls. This has to be done very carefully without causing the IOL to rotate. So once the Gupta ring is disengaged, you will see again, while I remove the Gupta ring, the danger of reusing a device. Because when you reuse a device, the scrolls tend to open up, and also there is a distortion and skew of the scrolls. So you can see that while I am pulling the device out, that the scrolls get trapped within the corneal valve. The scroll is so opened out that it is very difficult for me to get it out. This does not happen when you are using a fresh device. Well, already the case had been pretty challenging so far, and I felt that I did not need any new challenges. I was able to get the scroll out. And finally, wash out the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber. I'm quite happy with the fact that the IOL is well centered within the bag, and my Toric IOL alignment is also spot on and perfect. Postoperatively, this patient did extremely well. He had an unaided visual acuity of 6/9, residual astigmatism of 0.5 diopters, and an alignment accuracy of the Toric IOL of within 3 degrees of intended axis of placement. So the message in this case is that as ophthalmologists, many times we need to expect the unexpected, and even if the unexpected happens, we should respond in an expected manner so that we get good acceptable results.